Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. What a beautiful morning we have today. I would like to give a warm welcome to Bapak Yusri Fajar, SSMA, as the Director of Brawijaya Language Center. And I also would like to give a warm welcome to Ibu Ririn, Ibu Pratnyawati, and Bapak Lukman Hidayat as the managers of Brawijaya Language Centers. Ladies and gentlemen, a warm and gracious morning to each one of you. Welcome to Writing Articles for International Journals webinar. Let me introduce myself. My name is Anissa Manistigosa from Brawijaya Language Center, Universitas Brawijaya. Today I'm honored to be your moderator in this fascinating parallel session. Before we jump to today's agenda, I would like to invite Bapak Yusri to deliver his opening remark. To Bapak Yusri, time is yours.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is a distinct honor and privilege for me to welcome all of you to this highly anticipated webinar. Dr. John Charles Ryan's extensive experience and contribution to the field of academic writing are both admirable and noteworthy. Throughout his career, he has navigated the intricate process of international publication, demonstrating excellence in research dissemination. His insights, which we'll generously share with us today, are invaluable for individuals at all stages of their academic journey. Before we delve into this insightful webinar, I'd like to take a moment to introduce you to the Brawijaya Language Center. BLC is a hub of opportunities, a gateway to language and academic excellence, and a place where you can transform your language skills and scholarly dreams into reality. Brawijaya Language Center is also a cornerstone of language services dedicated to providing a wide range of support for our academic community and beyond. We are a partner in your academic journey, and we are here to help you achieve your language and scholarly aspirations. I wish to express my deep appreciation to Dr. John Charles Ryan for gracing us with his presence and for his willingness to impart his knowledge and experience. Your dedication to the pursuit of scholarly excellence is truly commendable, and we eagerly anticipate your presentation. I would also like to acknowledge and commend to the diligent efforts of the Brawijaya Language Center team for organizing this event, which serve a testament to our commitment to fostering academic growth and excellence. In closing, I extend my gratitude to each of you for joining us today. Your presence here signifies your dedication to the art of academic writing and your pursuit of knowledge that transcends borders. Without further ado, let us begin this enriching webinar on article writing for international publication. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pak Yusri, for insightful remarks. And I have prepared with the link for the participant to fill as the attendance mark for e-certificate. Peserta dipersilahkan untuk mengisi formulir Google untuk mencatat kehadiran guna menerima sertifikat. Link formulir sudah saya bagikan di kotak chat, jadi harap mengisi formulir sesuai dengan nama lengkap, harap diperhatikan huruf kapital dan penulisan gelar, karena yang akan ditulis di e-sertifikat akan mengacu pada apa yang Bapak Ibu tuliskan di Google Form, di link form Google. Today, our keynote presentation will be delivered by none other than the esteemed Dr. John Charles Ryan, Ph.D. from Southern Cross University. Before we delve into the captivating insights he has in store for us, let me take a moment to acquaint you with his illustrious background. Dr. John Charles Ryan, MA PhD, is an adjunct associate professor at Southern Cross University, Australia. Research focuses on Aboriginal Australian literature, Southeast Asian eco-criticism, environmental humanities, eco-poetics, and critical plant studies. His recent books include Introduction to the Environmental Humanities, The Mind of Plants, Narratives of Vegetal Intelligence, Nationalism in India, Text and Context, and Environment, Media, and Popular Culture in Southeast Asia. His eco-poetry, including Seeing Trees in 2020, concerns the botanical world and human-plant relations. He is also a prolific author in reputable international journals indexed in Scopus. And what you see on the screen is 5 most recent articles. So first, Dr. John Ryan recently wrote about indigenous phytopoetics, plants, poetry, and biocultural justice. He also writes about eco-criticism, on becoming plant-minded, fire ecologies, human-tree relations, and Anthropocene resistance in Aboriginal Australian literature, and imagining plants' percipient botanical futures in the speculative fiction of Brian Aldiss and Ursula Le Guin. Setelah ini, Bapak John akan memulai presentasi beliau. Peserta mohon menyiapkan abstrak dalam bahasa Inggris, karena nanti saat presentasi, Pak John juga akan membuka sesi diskusi. Dan peserta diperbolehkan mengirim abstrak ke kolom chat secara langsung. Jadi mohon nanti apabila Pak John membuka sesi diskusi, langsung dikopas saja abstrak yang dimiliki Bapak, Ibu, dan peserta secara teks. Jadi tidak usah dikirim link atau dokumennya. Dalam diskusi nanti, saya sebagai moderator juga akan membantu peserta untuk menerjemahkan apabila ada pertanyaan kepada Bapak John atau sebaliknya. Baik, without further ado, it is my absolute pleasure to welcome Dr. John Charles to show your presentation. We eagerly wait for the wisdom and insights you will share with us today, Dr. John. The screen is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone, for the warm welcome. Thank you, Ibu Anissa, and thank you, Pa Yusri, for your very kind and warm remarks this morning. Selamat pagi semuanya. Saya harap kamu sehat. I hope you're doing well. It's very nice to see you all. I had the fortunate opportunity to visit Brawijaya University about 3 years ago, and it's such a beautiful campus and such a strong English program. I was so impressed, and I would love to visit again sometime. So our topic today is writing academic articles, and I will switch over to my slides now. Okay. So we're discussing writing articles for international journals, insights and advice from the field. So my hope is to give you some practical suggestions for enhancing your academic publishing. It's quite a process from conceptualizing an article, performing the research, to publishing and promoting an article. It's quite an involved process. There are so many steps involved from the beginning to the end. And I hope to guide you through that process to the best extent that I can. I have quite a bit of experience recently, in particular, as an editor. So I've recently adopted this journal, I guess, as the lead editor, working with a deputy editor. This is a new journal called Plant Perspectives. It's an interdisciplinary journal that is focused on perspectives on botanical life and the world of plants. So not only from the scientific point of view, but from the point of view of literature and art, theology and history, social sciences, and so forth. So it's called Plant Perspectives. And as the lead editor, I see a high volume of material. And so I've become acquainted with the requirements of strong academic writing and especially the kind of writing that will get an article across. The message will come across fully to the editors and to the reviewers and successfully be published. So, and the second journal that I'm closely involved with is called The Trumpeter, which is an interesting journal insofar as it is one of the oldest environmental philosophy journals in the world. It was founded in 1983, and I've just started managing editorship of the journal this year. This is a journal that I read as a student, and so it's a great pleasure now to contribute to the content of the journal. But I've done a lot of other editing of books, editing of special issues of journals, and editing of PhD dissertations and everything imaginable within the academic scope. So I'm very happy to share any of the insights that I can with you. Lao Tzu said a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, right? So you have to begin somewhere. But where to begin, right? That's often the main question. If we are motivated to do research and to publish out of that research, where do we begin that process, right? And hopefully what I'll present in the next 75 minutes will give you an idea of where to begin, because I believe you're probably all at different stages. Some of you may be far advanced into a particular research project and have drafts of articles ready to go. Some of you may be in the beginning stages of your research. And so it's important to acknowledge where you are in the process. Ernest Hemingway was a diligent writer, and many professional writers are diligent writers. They structure their day according to a writing schedule. And so we see Ernest Hemingway pictured here, the novelist, the great American novelist pictured here. It was a dark and stormy night. Goal is 4,000 today, right? So Hemingway having this particular goal of 4,000 words per day. And I've even heard of Stephen King having a kind of 9 to 5 writing schedule where he says he treats it as a job. He goes to his writing office, he writes from 9 to 5 and goes home, right? So writerly habits are important to adopt. And I believe what publishing and writing require are belief in yourself, some amount of inspiration in what you are writing about and what you're researching, commitment to the process, the whole process, from the first idea, the kernel of inspiration that causes you to undertake a research project, to having your article published and promoting it through various channels. It's a long process, a very manageable one once you know the steps, but it requires commitment, absolutely. Discipline. I believe that there is merit in writing small chunks each day. However, other writers may prefer to have 4 to 8 hour sections of time. So it's important to identify your writing habits. Are you a writer who can work on something for half an hour or 1 hour per day early in the morning? Or are you a writer researcher who prefers having, let's say, that whole Friday, 8 hours straight to work on something, right? So those are the sorts of aspects of self-reflection that I think are important. This is a brief outline of what I'd like to touch on today. I'll begin with the idea of what your research story is. Then we'll turn to the question of why you should publish your research, choosing a topic and title, structuring an article, drafting an article, and within that I'll discuss some tips for using English well and efficiently, writing an abstract and selecting keywords. We'll spend a bit of time here more so than in the other sections because the abstract is especially important, and I'll explain why. Submitting the article, revising the article, and finally, not to forget, promoting the article. Once you've published it, it's important to promote it as well. So we'll begin with the question of what is your research story? And I'd just like you to take a few minutes to reflect on these questions on your own. The reason that I start with your research story is because it always informs your research choices, including your publication choices. So what is your research story? Hopefully these questions will guide you in contemplating what your research story is. What inspires you to do your research? Is it a commitment to education? Is it a commitment to justice of some kind, or expanding knowledge? Is it enjoyment? Is it that you love working with a particular population? What are you passionate about? You should do research that you are passionate about in an ideal world, right? Some of our research we may feel less passionate about, but that passion will guide us through the challenges that are often involved in academic publishing. What is your educational, professional, and personal background? How can you bring those experiences to a new research agenda? And most importantly, in terms of that last question, when we reflect on our educational, professional, and personal background, it gives us an idea of where we may need extra skill development, some expertise, some training, right, to perhaps to fill in the gaps so that we become stronger academic researchers and publishers. What are your prior experiences writing and publishing academic research? What's your current research project? And how will your research enhance your future and benefit society? So these are just some questions. You can reflect on them later. You can reflect on one or all. It's to give you the foundation for your research in your research story, which draws together your expertise, your experiences, your commitments, your passions, and gives you also at the same time an indication of where you may need some extra guidance, some training, and so forth. So your research story, that's something you can write up and keep at hand, something you could have in your mind and reflect on. But I believe it's an important foundation for what we are discussing today. The second question is also related to that research story foundation that I referred to, and it's why should you publish your research? And what I'd like to do is invite you to write your ideas in the Zoom chat. And you see that I've already mentioned the first one, meet my KPI by key performance indicators for promotion, right? That's the obvious utilitarian sort of one that we have to fulfill basic requirements as academic researchers for our institutions. So we'll get that one out of the way. And what I suggested, there are lots of other reasons for publishing your research. And just take a few minutes and write any ideas that come to mind in the chat. And I'd be curious to see, how do you feel about that? Why should you publish your research? Let's see if there's any. And I'll just refer to the chat. And yeah, so Andika, I hope that my research will be beneficial for society, especially the MSME field. Absolutely. That when we publish our research, it becomes widely available and hence of potential benefit to society. Absolutely. To pursue my next degree at PhD in management. Absolutely. There are requirements for entering PhD programs, publishing requirements, just as there are requirements to publish as part of your PhD program and consequently publish as part of an academic position. Yes, so for now, to meet the requirements of my final PhD defense from Miika, thank you. Yes, as a graduation requirement, absolutely. Publishing oftentimes 2 articles in international journals. It could vary by institution, but certainly as part of a graduation requirement, absolutely. Any other ideas? Why publish your research? Beyond the institutional requirements, are there any ideas about the advantages, the benefits of To get detailed feedback. Excellent. That's the one I was just going to mention, Novi. To get detailed feedback, because part of the publication process is double blind or even triple blind, occasionally peer review. So you're getting detailed feedback on your research in an objective environment. Someone who doesn't know you and you don't know that person who's giving you the feedback, you're getting that expertise, oftentimes from international reviewers. That is invaluable. Now, maybe it is criticism, but hopefully it is constructive criticism. So it's criticism that you can incorporate into your project, make it stronger. So that is highly valuable, getting that feedback through the peer review process. Very good. To become a world-class researcher, absolutely. Publication is part of becoming an internationally recognized researcher. Otherwise, the research that we do may only be available to a small community of scholars. So when we publish, especially when we publish in open access format, our work is broadly available. To understand ESG from more humanized view, yes, behavioral economics, sure. Publishing expands our perspective on our research. Perhaps it incorporates new disciplinary perspectives to bring a particular case that needs more concern. So it is more evoking public awareness. Absolutely. Research should be of public value and public benefit. And that is why there's a movement, as I mentioned, towards open access publishing as part of research publication requirements, so that someone without a library subscription can have access to your research. Organizations involved in social, environmental, and educational change can also have access to your research. That's great. Those are excellent ideas. I'll just point out a few more. Showing the novelty of the results of the research, absolutely. Highlighting the potential impact of our research through publication. Influence others positively, absolutely, or scientifically based, useful to society. Yeah, very, very good. That's what I was driving at, right? That there are many reasons to publish your research aside for the institutional requirements, which are absolutely important. But there are broader reasons, and it's important to bear that in mind as we go through this process of publication. Okay, that's very good. Let's carry on, and I'd like to begin with choosing a topic in a title. Many of you have already chosen a topic. Perhaps you haven't settled on a definite title for your publication just yet. Your topic evolves from your research story. Now, it could be the case that your department is pushing you in a particular direction, but certainly you have some expertise in that direction already. Maybe it is a particular kind of literature. Let's say in the study of literature, there is psychoanalysis. So maybe your department wants you to adopt psychoanalysis or eco-criticism as an approach to the study of literature. Maybe that's new for you, but you have the background in literary studies already. So that new topic does evolve from your research. So finding the passion for that topic. You should be interested in and preferably passionate about your topic long enough to sustain an intensive study. An intensive study could be 3 to 4 years for a PhD study. It could be more than 4 years for a grant-funded study, government grant-funded study with multiple collaborators. It could be 3 to 6 months for a journal article. So the duration will vary, but you should have an interest and passion enough to sustain that study. Whatever duration it is, it will be intensive, right? If it's not consuming your time, your physical exertion through typing, it may be consuming your thoughts, because you might be thinking about that research project or that article even when you're doing something else, or maybe even when you start dreaming about it, whatever it may be. It's always on your mind, so it's an intensive process. Your research should make a meaningful contribution to knowledge and society. I think we can all agree on that. How it makes that contribution is determined, of course, by a number of factors, including your methodology and conclusions you can use from your project. The topic should be specific in terms of its focus or subject and a methodology. And when we look at abstracts in a moment, the most successful abstracts have a very specific methodology and focus or scope, often in that case. They are well scoped, their methodology is clearly elaborated, and sometimes it's an innovative methodology or a methodology that's not necessarily new, but is being applied in a new context. And your title should be intriguing and communicate the key elements of your research. Lots of titles for journal articles use this sort of two-part format, which is you have a lead title and then a double dot, right, the colon, and then a secondary. So let's call it a leading or primary title, and then a secondary title. Oftentimes, the lead title is something that draws the reader's interest, but is kind of open, is broad, maybe even poetic sounding. The secondary title, the trailing title, colon, often is more descriptive, what the project accomplished, the methodology it adopted, the results that it discovered. Okay, let's look at some article titles from Educational Studies, which is a highly ranked Scopus journal. And just to give you an idea of how to structure article titles, distributed leadership and teachers' affective commitment to change in Malaysian primary schools, the contextual influence of gender in teaching experience. Very good title, very descriptive. We know that the focus is distributed leadership. We know also that an emphasis is affective commitment. So affect, right? Emotions are involved there. And we know the focus is on Malaysian primary school. Very good, very descriptive. And then colon, the contextual influence of gender and teaching experience. Right? So lots of factors there laid out in the title. And certainly for someone researching Malaysian primary education, this would be of interest. The second title, Criticism and Education. Dissatisfaction of parents who homeschooled and those who send their children to school with the education system. All right. So we see the first title, the lead title, is quite broad. Criticism and Education. Oh, that could be many, many things. But we find in the second title some more specific, right? That dissatisfaction of parents who homeschool compared to those who send their children to school within the education system. Right, so we know it's a study of parents' satisfaction or lack of satisfaction with homeschooling in comparison to traditional schooling. It's still a fairly vague title overall. Do we know the population who's being studied? Not necessarily. What education system are we referring to? So there might be opportunity to improve this. This is a published title, however, but there could be room for improvement. Third example, the confrontation of identities. How university students manage academic and religious selves in higher education. So once again, that first title, that primary or lead title, is often like the title of a even like a novel, or it's somehow poetic, or it makes you think, but it's not specific, right? So the confrontation of identities. It could be a movie title for all we know. And then the second title is the descriptive. So how university students manage. We know that the project involves academic and religious identities in higher education. Do we know more about the the higher education population, not so much. We'd have to read the article. So that could be an improvement in this particular title. What country are we referring to? Where was the study conducted? And so forth. So some extra details would help. Now, this is, I believe, probably the strongest title of the four: The Impact of Professional Learning on In-Service Teachers, Pedagogical Delivery of Literacy-Infused Science with Middle School English Learners, a randomized controlled trial study. It's a long title, but the key terms are all there. Professional learning, literacy-infused science. We know its population is middle school English learners. And we know something about methodology, a randomized controlled study, and the study population being American. So I would say that's certainly the longest title, perhaps the most effective one in terms of, if I am researching middle school literacy and I read that title, I'll know exactly if it's of relevance to my research, because there's so much there. There's not much hidden in that title. It's very good. So what's the title of your article? I'd like you to please write your title in the Zoom chat. And let's spend about 5 minutes giving one another feedback on our article titles. I will do that as well. And I invite you as audience members also to provide feedback on other participants' article titles. So when you are ready, please paste your working title. Of course, it can change, but please paste your working title in the chat, and let's spend about 5 minutes giving some feedback to each other. Okay, great. We have some coming through already. Let's go to the top of our chat. Impact cooperative use technology to performance case study in Bali province. That's good because you have methodology, which is case study. That's certainly part of the methodology. Bali, we know the geographical context of the study, and impact cooperative use technology. So a good working title. It may be possible as you progress to specify which technology you're working with, but otherwise that's a good working title. Decentralized autonomous organizations with blockchain, the rise of governance reformation. Blockchain, so you're specifying the technology that you are focusing on in the research. I don't know what DAOs necessarily are, but you're specifying that as well, the rise of governance reformation. It seems like a good working title to me. The influence of transformational leadership on the sustainability of a group of MSMEs in Indonesia. Yes, so the influence of transformational leadership. Transformational leadership has its own theory and own conceptualization, so that is good to mention that. On the sustainability, so it could be a question of, are we talking about sustainability in its broadest conception as environmental, social, cultural, and economic? So specifying the terms of sustainability may be something to consider in the title. And what group of MSMEs? Maybe it's possible to specify that. So give it some thought. Otherwise, that's a good working title. It communicates exactly what you have in mind. Households food waste determinants in developed and developing countries. A systematic literature review. Okay, good. Household food waste determinants in developed and developing countries. Well, maybe to get more focus there on the title, you could specify which developed and developing countries you're researching. Certainly to cover most developed and developing countries would be a massive scope of a project. So you could specify which countries. It's a literature review, so that gives me an idea of your approach. Yeah. We'll take just a couple more. And this is something also you can, in the chat, you can keep giving each other feedback as our as the presentation progresses. I'll just have a look at a few more. Board gender diversity and sustainability reporting, past, present, and future. An interesting topic. So board gender diversity and sustainability reporting, presumably, how does board gender diversity impact sustainability reporting, past, present, and future? Now, the second part of the title is a little less concrete than the first part. So you may consider how to add more detail to the second part of that title to get some key elements in there, such as what population is being studied. Are you referring to boards of corporations or nonprofit organizations? And what sort of sustainability are we talking about? Is it environmental, economic, cultural, social, and personal, or is it one element of sustainability, right? So sustainability comprises lots of different factors. So yeah, we'll leave it at that. But yeah, great working titles overall. It may be possible to add some more detail and therefore specify and ground your titles a bit more. But certainly it's good to keep in mind as well that you will have keywords and you will have an abstract that will also deepen, right, the title. So for those who are just browsing through a database and see the title of your article, they'll be intrigued. They'll then have the opportunity to look at the keywords in the abstract before making a decision about downloading the whole article and reading it for their own research. Okay, that's really good. And feel free to carry on with feedback in the chat. Structuring an article. So we have a topic, we have a title. How do we structure an article? It may be the case in this cartoon where there's a massive amount of words and no structure, right? So 120,000 words, but where's my structure? And I believe that it's important to have a blueprint before you begin writing. A blueprint or a structure or an outline, whatever you wish to call it. But it's important to determine a structure early on. So structuring an article, decide on an appropriate blueprint early on to save time and energy in the long run. This will also enhance the peer review process, because what a blueprint ensures is that all of the elements will be there, right? So a blueprint allows you to quickly scan the contents of your article, the placement of content, and to determine if something is missing. That process is much more difficult when you're reading the article in its entirety and then trying to decide what may need to be filled in. So it's a bit like building a house, right? You need to have plans before you can construct the house. So that's the way I look at structuring. Have a structure early on, a working structure, but allow it to evolve or change as you write. And it will change. It should change, in fact. Of course, all research requires a literature review. And that's simply to establish who else has done research in this area. And that's why a critical literary review is important. So it's more than summarizing previous studies. It's analyzing previous studies and identifying how your research will add to those previous studies. So that's a critical literature review. It may be that previous studies ignored a particular variable, a particular population, or that there was some question about previous methodologies. So a critical literature review goes deeper than simply summarizing the existing studies. Specify your methodology to explain how you did the research and what conceptual lens you use. Now, a methodology is different to your methods. Your methodology, the way that I look at a methodology is methods plus conceptual lens is methodology. Because your methodology has to involve a conceptual lens, because you'll have to analyze the data, right, that come out of your methods. So it may be that your method is interviewing, the use of questionnaires, the use of focus groups. Those are your methods. Your methodology will have a theoretical or conceptual basis. Maybe your methodology is ethnographic research, grounded theory, participatory research, and so on, right? So think about the distinction between methodology and methods and the kind of conceptual lens you'll need to analyze your data. So the basic elements, of course, to most research articles are results, discussion, conclusion, of course, a kind of an introductory section with that literature review, and a conclusion. Every article requires a conclusion, even in the arts and humanities. But it's important to check the requirements of the journal. And I can say that in my own field of literary studies, if I wrote an article that used the headings results, discussion, and conclusion, it would probably be rejected because literary studies, humanities articles are more thematically organized. In science, social science, computer science, and other technical fields, this is probably more of the norm, where you have these sections like results, discussion, conclusion, and so forth. So check the requirements of the journal, but also be aware of the requirements of your discipline. Now, these are sample article structures, and I've included the complete articles in the readings that I've sent to you. And so feel free to have a look. But these are high impact journals and high impact articles. They've were very influential when they were published. They were the most highly cited at the time of publication, or in the, let's say, the year following publication. So let's look at an example here. Whoops. This is Levesque et al. Work Organization and Mental Health Problems in PhD Students. An incredibly important topic, mental health in PhD research students, published in a journal called Research Policy. We see the introduction includes two subheadings: mental health concerns at universities, and then why is the mental health of PhD students important? Now that's interesting. You can title your, in this case, we'll call it a subsection. You can title your subsection as a question. That does provide a good kind of draw for the reader when the section or subsection, however it's placed, is actually in the form of a question. And then part two, background and literature review. So we know that PhD students in Belgium are the subject. Prior research on mental health in the university sector. 2.3, work organization and mental health problems in university, divided into two further subsections: work content and organization content. 3, data and methodology. Sample 1, PhD students. Sample 2, comparison groups. 4 variables: mental health, work context, organizations, sociodemographics. And then 3.4, analytical strategy. An excellent data and methodology section, crystal clear. 4, results, and then 5, discussion and conclusion. In this case, they are lumped together, discussion and conclusion. That's not always the case. Sometimes the sections are different. 5.1, contributions, summary, limitations, and policy implications. Excellent discussion and conclusion, because discussing limitations of your research is essential, and policy implications, absolutely essential. Almost in every research article, there should be a discussion of limitations and also prospects for future research. How does your research stimulate future research? That should be discussed. So in this case, there may be policy implications. So I'd say that's a good, clear, well-organized article structure. The second example, Tian and Reeve, classroom-based intervention to help teachers decrease students' motivation, very important topic as well. Motivation, how to motivate students. The introduction contains a lot of subheadings, and that's fine. That's good. It helps to clearly lay out the elements of the project. So a motivation, what is a motivation in pedagogy? Self-determination theory, student engagement. So theorizing these terms, very, very important. Autonomy supportive intervention program. Physical ed in Korea, so we know it's a Korean population that's being studied. All right. The method, teacher participants, student participants. So teachers and students were both involved in the research. Measures, we have 4 listed there: autonomy, supportive, and controlling teaching, psychological need, multidimensional PE, A motivation, classroom engagement, results, discussion, acknowledgement. Very good. Certainly very detailed. May be possible to add more subheadings or subsections to the results discussion sections, but we would need to look closer at the article. Certainly in terms of outlining all the elements of the house that we are building. The house is the research article, right? Outlining all of the elements. In terms of doing that, it's very successful. This is much different. This is an example from the humanities. And you can see that it is radically different, in fact, from the first 2. So this is a journal called Environmental Humanities, and it's a study of novels, how these different novels are dealing with the climate crisis. There's an introduction, and then there are 3 sections. Each section is devoted to one novel. So Fury Road is a novel, Slurb is a novel, and The Island Will Sink is a novel. Each section devoted to one novel and the analysis of that novel's engagement with the climate crisis. There's the section 5, which is almost equivalent, let's say, to a discussion section in which the author is dealing with questions of aesthetics and affect. Affect also appearing on our first, in one of the first title that we looked at, a list of article titles. Affect, very important. And then acknowledgement. So the section 5 works as discussion conclusion, roughly. But you can see this is thematically organized. So the introduction, discussion, introduction methodology, discussion conclusion format doesn't apply here. And this is typically how articles in the humanities are organized. Okay. Right. So what is the structure of your article? Let's have a few examples, please. Let's have the first 5 participants. Well, we'll look at the first 5. Anyone, feel free to share your outline, but due to time constraints, we'll just look at the first 5 participants' outlines, and please put those in the chat. And once again, you're very welcome to provide feedback to other participants, but let's see if there's lots of great titles here from our last exercise. Any article outlines that you'd like to contribute there, feel free. Just give you a few moments to add those to the chat. If not, that's no problem. We can also come back to this. So how about I invite you to put your structure in the chat when you're ready, and we'll come back to that towards the end of the presentation. So really good, some good, really great titles, some interesting research. The last one by Vivian, Fostering Ancestral Art, Jaranan Sutta Wijoyo as an Anti-Elitist Cultural Community. Absolutely, very good. Question, is it possibility for science research? Okay, good. Yeah, we'll get to those questions. All right. Yeah, let's carry on. And for anyone who would like to add their article structure to the chat, please do. Have a look at that a little later, and we'll also get to those questions towards the end. And just a note about feedback. Feedback is an interesting aspect of academic publishing. A lot of times we are asked to give feedback on articles and student work, colleagues' work, and so forth. Feedback should be balanced. It should recognize the strengths of what we are reading, but also make recommendations for improvement. Balanced feedback is more likely to be received well by the author. Okay, so it's they call it the sandwich technique. You begin with a positive, you move to the negatives or weaknesses of the article, and then you end on a positive. And that's sort of feedback of any kind, I think, works well in that format. Okay, let's turn to drafting an article. So we have our article title, we have our topic mapped out, we have a working structure of our article. How do we begin drafting the article? So here are some tips for drafting research articles based on my own experience and my experience editing. One approach is to convert your redrafted doctoral thesis into a series of articles. Now, if you have to publish 2 articles from your thesis, that means that you will have several chapters that you have not published. So as you are a new academic who just graduated, let's say from a doctoral program, you have this wealth of material in hand to rework into a series of articles. When I did my own PhD thesis, I had, I think, 8 or 9 chapters. I converted each one of those chapters into an article. It required some reworking, but it's a great opportunity. So as a new academic, that's your first port of call for your research. It's to examine how your thesis might be converted into a series of articles or into a monograph, into a book. That's a different discussion, but certainly into a series of articles. Commit a certain number of hours or days per week writing. Some authors wait till they feel inspired, but I prefer Stephen King's approach, which is I'm going to write from 9 to 12 today, or Ernest Hemingway's approach. I'm going to write 4,000 words today. Not even 4,000. When I work on a book, I say I want to draft 1,000 words today. Right? 1,000. That's my goal often for working on an article or working. So 1,000 words today, even if they are nonsensical. When I meet that 1,000 word goal, at least I feel like I've made some progress. So commit a certain number of hours or days. Divide your writing into manageable chunks. Rather than saying, oh, I'm going to write the whole article this weekend, say, oh, I'm going to write the paragraph in the next couple hours. I'm going to write a section this weekend, right? Manageable chunks, paragraphs, think sections, and then slowly, with the guidance of your outline, you'll have a whole article in hand eventually. Set realistic goals within the larger aim of your article. Realistic goals. Yeah, that relates to, let's complete a paragraph this morning. Let's complete a section today. Let's complete 2 sections this weekend, whatever it may be, okay, or this week. Right when you feel productive, we should be aware of our biorhythms. I have colleagues who work very well at night, midnight to early in the morning. I work best in the morning and then after about 3 or 4 p.m. Not so very late at night. So be aware of your biorhythm. If you are co-authoring, show as you go. Show as you go means that you request feedback as you're writing. So let's say you have a co-author on your article and you've both agreed to write certain sections. If I write a section, I might show it to my co-author to get feedback. Now, you can use this approach with your supervisor as well, if you're a PhD student or research student. Rather than saying, well, I'll just draft my whole thesis or even my whole chapter and send it to my supervisor, you can say, I'll draft a section and I'll send it to my supervisor, get feedback. So I call that the show as you go approach, request feedback. Shut off social media. Airplane mode is a great tool. And I believe, at least I've started to call it airplaning my phone. Airplaning my phone so that you won't be disrupted by social media while you're trying to write. Limit internet usage. Of course, we have to use the internet to get data, to get research articles and so forth, and oftentimes to use the dictionary and thesaurus, but limit internet usage. Reference as you write. I can't stress this one enough. Reference as you write. Rather than waiting until the end of your article to then fill in your references, reference as you write. It will save you a lot of headache in the long run. Use a program like EndNote or Mendeley, or I'm sure there are other new ones out there now, but reference as you write. So if I'm referencing something, I include, I enter it into EndNote. EndNote produces a parenthetical citation, including, depending on the referencing style, it might be the author of the article, the year, and then the page number. And then EndNote will produce the bibliography. I'm surprised how many authors do not use a referencing management software, even when they are publishing work in journals. And so what this means is that the editor or the reviewer of your article has to spend a great deal of time hunting down references. And this will weaken your article and will weaken the outcome of your review. So reference as you write. Drafting an article. Drafting is rewriting and rewriting. I don't think anyone writes something perfectly at first. So especially academic writing, you may have to write and rewrite. Determine your best habits, right? I mentioned this already, but certainly morning, afternoon, night. Do you work better in 3-hour blocks, 1-hour blocks? Where do you work best? Library, home, office. Make those sort of self-reflective judgments. Make sure to use fully formed paragraphs with topic sentences and of 200, 250 words. Rather than very short paragraphs, even I believe in the sciences, aim for fully formed paragraphs. Now, in technical articles, the paragraph may be shorter, but in the humanities and social sciences areas, paragraphs tend to be fully formed at 200 minimum words. So include a topic sentence in your paragraph so that a topic sentence is a broad sentence that begins your paragraph and that links your paragraph to the previous paragraph, somehow links the ideas so that there aren't abrupt transitions between paragraphs. Okay, so keep in mind paragraph formation. Keep your literature review available. Now, as you're writing, it may be the case that you've printed out your articles and you can refer to them as you're writing, or it may be the case that you have them uploaded into a referencing management software like EndNote and they will appear, or it may be that you keep them as PDFs in a folder. However you keep your literature, make sure that it is available. And I mentioned referencing management software, very, very important. I tried using Mendeley. I prefer EndNote because there's less requirement for internet logins. With Mendeley, I couldn't sort that out, so I'm an EndNote person. Have your supervisor or colleague read drafts, stress that again. Show as you go, show as you go. It also reduces the supervisor or colleague's reading time. So if you send a section to your colleague, that may be 10 to 15 minutes of reading time. If you send the whole article, we're looking at a longer segment of reading time. So I believe it depends on your supervisor or colleague's reading habits, but I prefer to read smaller amounts of work more frequently than a larger amount of work every so often. All right, let's show as you go. Picasso and others have said, have reflected on the process of writing. If you're clear in your mind about what you're going to paint, there is no point in painting. And what Picasso means there, and he's talking about painting, but it's applicable to writing. He's saying that writing is a process of discovery. you may not know exactly where it's going. If you have your structure in place, that's great. But even then, you may not know exactly where writing is going. So think of writing as a process of discovery, and that's why we have to draft and redraft. Francois Sagan said, I have to start to write to have ideas. I can relate to that. Writing is a process of discovery. Sometimes you don't know what you know. You may know it, but have no idea how it fits together. I think that's important to bear in mind. And what this means then is give yourself time to draft and redraft your writing. Okay. Tips for using English well in articles, just a few here, but aim for clear, direct, and succinct language. This means avoiding overly complex sentence structures. Overly complex sentences may have multiple clauses, right? Or excessive adjectives. And as an editor, I've never seen an article criticized for being too simply written. I have, however, seen many articles criticized for being too written in a too complicated fashion, overly complicated fashion. So clear, direct writing. If you have the opportunity to use two adjectives, just use one, right? If you're finding yourself adding lots of commas to the end of the sentence and adding more sentence, add a period instead, add a full stop instead, and make a new sentence. Really basic elements of writing, but absolutely essential. It's hard to understand the meaning of an article when the sentence structure is overly complex. Use the active voice, very important. Minimize the passive voice. By the active voice, I mean, through this example, the team researched childhood obesity. In comparison to the passive voice, childhood obesity was researched by the team. You may say, oh, that's kind of trivial consideration. And to some extent, I understand that point. However, if academic writing is about being crystal clear, having absolute precision with language, the active voice is essential because the active voice puts the action directly onto a particular subject. So the team research. But in the second example, we don't know the childhood obesity was researched. There's some obscurity in the language, right? So use the active voice. It makes your writing clearer. Be careful of academic jargon and discipline-specific terminology. Academic jargon is the terminology we use because we are embedded in our academic discourse, but we have to remember that it's important to define those key terms simply on first use, right? So of the examples we saw, for example, let's say a motivation. One of the researchers was looking at a motivation. Defining a motivation would be essential to that article. And then detailing what sort of studies have been done on a motivation, the lack of motivation would be essential. So define terms on it. And this is a very basic one, but I'm also surprised at how often it's not done. Check your spelling, grammar, and punctuation with spell check, with grammar check, right? To catch those obvious errors. That is a very, very easy solution, but just remember to use the automated functions to check your spelling and grammar. Okay, so we've covered drafting, we've covered structuring, we've covered selecting a title, selecting keywords. We're moving well in this process. Now I'd like to talk about writing an abstract and selecting keywords. So this professor is asking, what is it? And the student is saying, you said do an abstract. But an abstract is an odd term for an abstract, right? We know as an abstract, because in fact, an abstract in an article should be very, very concrete. It shouldn't be abstract at all. So what is an abstract? It's basically a summary statement, a synthesis, usually of about 150 up to maybe 250 words, a synthesis of your research article. Essentially, it's one well-developed paragraph. It's coherent, it is succinct, it's able to stand alone as a unit of information. So what I mean by that is if a researcher finds your abstract in a database, the researcher can ascertain the relevance of your research to his or her research. An abstract offers a roadmap, much in the way that the structure offers that. But an abstract is more of a concise snapshot of the article and its contribution to the field. And it covers or touches on the basic components of the full paper: the background, the purpose, the problem, methodology, methods, results in the conclusion. And this will vary with your discipline. So how do you write an abstract? It's often the most challenging part, especially at the end of your article when you think, oh, I'm almost done, but I have to write this abstract. And I recommend drafting an abstract early on, but then finalizing your abstract at the end of your article. So working on it a bit at the beginning, but then finalizing it at the end. An abstract is used by editors for these reasons, and this is why it's important. If there is a special issue of a journal and you send an abstract, the editors will use the abstract to ascertain whether to invite your full article. Right? So there's a special issue, you're interested, you send an abstract, the editor of the special issue reads it, says, oh, your work seems like it would fit well in the special issue. Let's have your full article. Okay, so that's one usage. An editor will use your abstract to invite potential peer reviewers. Peer reviewers are also known as blind referees or sometimes as external readers. They are basically people who are reading your article, experts in their fields, and providing feedback, typically critical feedback, because they don't know the author identity, and you as the author don't know their identity as the reviewers. So when I send an article out for peer review, I put the abstract in the invitation email. So that's another usage. After publication of the article, the abstract is used to make your article searchable through databases and websites. So typically the abstract and the keywords allow your article to be found in a database when another researcher performs a search. Abstracts are also important for conferences. When you're interested in a conference, you typically send an abstract. The conference organizers will use the abstract to assess the suitability of your proposed presentation, and also to create themes, conference parallel session themes. So your abstract is used in that way. So it's a very, very important part of research. It's used by editors, it's used by peer reviewers, it's used by other researchers, and it's used by conference organizers. So an abstract is essentially like a guiding light in the sometimes dark tunnel of academic authorship. What do I mean by that? When you're writing an article, you may sometimes feel lost. An abstract, when you feel lost, if you refer to your abstract, you can feel oriented again, feel refocused. An abstract keeps your main points and your central focus in mind as you're working in an article, which can become very intense at times. And an abstract as well is a guiding light for the reader. If I'm reading an article and I'm getting lost, I'll often refer back to the abstract and then continue. So the abstract is like a guiding light. What makes a good abstract? A good abstract contains no surprises. It doesn't contradict the article. It doesn't introduce something new. It stays consistent with the article itself. So read your abstract, read your article, make sure there's no contradiction, make sure there's nothing in the abstract that's mentioned that is not mentioned in the article. Okay. The abstract should be understandable to a wide audience as well as to your discipline, right? So the abstract will probably be less, it'll be written in a more reader-friendly way, let's say that, more reader-friendly way. So the abstract uses the language style of the article, but in a somewhat simplified form for general readers. I'll mention how to actually accomplish that. Abstracts, as a rule, don't use direct quotations in parenthetical citations, parenthetical references. So according to author A, quote, and then end quote in the citation, you wouldn't do that in the abstract usually. So don't use direct quotations in an abstract. And it shouldn't be abstract, it should be concrete and very specific. So how do we go about this? An abstract is an invitation for the reader and the writer to pause and reflect along the way. So for the writer, when you're drafting an article, the abstract is that guiding light. For the reader, when you're losing the main point of the article, the abstract can bring you back. Okay. It's like a beacon, like a lighthouse or a beacon. How do I write an abstract? Reread your article draft and then condense the information in each major section down to about 1 or 2 sentences. The aim there is to capture the key points within each section. By section, I mean literature review, methodology, discussion, conclusion, or whatever sort of sections you may have. Make sure you capture the key points. Read these sentences again that summarize. Sometimes I'll pull key sentences from a section and then put them in my abstract document and then redraft those sentences. So you want to make sure that all the major points of your article are being captured. Begin your abstract with a broad topic sentence. Then you shift into a research problem statement, where often you're using transitional words like however. And then you're moving sort of in the middle of the abstract, you're dealing with methods and methodology. You're clearly specifying the study population, geographical and historical scope of the article. Your research findings should be summarized in 1 to 2 sentences in your abstract. And if you're writing for a special issue of a journal, make sure that you're in your abstract, that you're relating your research clearly to the topic of the special issue. Check the overall word length. There often are limits to the abstract. These are imposed often by the journal submission system. So if the limit is 150 words, the journal system will cut your abstract off at 150 words. So in that case, you have to be exactly at 150 words. Sometimes characters are specified, character limits. Reduce words, create more succinct sentences, simplify sentence structures, rewrite, and rewrite. Edit for flow, expression, and clarity. And invite your colleagues and supervisors to read the abstract. The art of writing an abstract is, I think, different to other forms of academic writing. The abstract is a craft. And I believe if you ensure that you capture all the main points of your article, that's a good first direction towards a successful abstract, capturing all the main points of your article. This is called the funnel or dumbbell approach. Hopefully, I can explain this clearly. A funnel begins broadly. Let's look at the dumbbell on the left side here, right? It begins broadly at the top. It becomes narrow, 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 narrow. In the middle of that dumbbell, it's very narrow, very specific. That's where you're talking about methods and methodology. And then following that, you're broadening, 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 broadening. The bottom of the dumbbell is the conclusion of your abstract. The beginning of the dumbbell is the opening of your abstract. So you want to begin broadly, specify, broaden, end your abstract on a broad statement, often about the implications of your research for policy and for other issues and for future research. Let's see how this funnel, I call that the funnel or dumbbell approach to writing an abstract. Okay, let's see how this might work with a couple examples. Okay, so here is abstract example 1 from an article called Mortality in Puerto Rico After Hurricane Maria in the New England Journal of Medicine, one of the leading medical journals in the world. Look how the abstract begins with a broad statement. Remember that opening with a broad statement. Quantifying the effect of natural disasters on society is critical for recovery of public health services and infrastructure. A very nice, broad statement that invites the reader in. So we're talking about, generally about natural disasters, about society, about health services and infrastructure. A good example. But the problem is the death toll can be difficult to assess in the aftermath of a major disaster. The author could have used however, but I think the transition comes across, right? That second sentence states the research problem, right? The basic research problem, the death toll can be difficult to assess. And then there's a movement into the specifics of the research. September 2017, Hurricane Maria, Puerto Rico, and then the methods. Then we're moving into the methods. We're narrowing, right, at that point. So representative stratified sample, we surveyed 3,299 randomly chosen households, right? We're going towards the results. This is a fairly long abstract, so a mortality rate of 14.3 deaths. So they're examining statistics. And then we're looking at the implications and conclusions. This household-based survey suggests that the number of excess deaths related to Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico is more than 70 times the official estimate. That's significant, very significant. They're saying that the actual deaths from the hurricane were 70 times more than the official recorded deaths. So that's a statement of significance that ends the article. Ending the article on a powerful note, right? Very significant study. Let us look, we'll look at this, which is a little different. This is the spread of true and false news online from the journal Science. In this case, the authors are using the we pronoun, right? So we investigated, that's fine to use in a lot of cases. Or I investigated, even though we're told not to use first person, singular or plural, in this case, plural. That is acceptable in some journals. So we investigated the differential diffusion of all of the verified true and false news stories distributed on Twitter from 2006 to 2017. I would say that the first sentence, this topic sentence could even be broader, right? So rather than getting directly into their particular research, they could have added a broader topic sentence. Then there is a clear explication of how the research was conducted. So once again, the middle section of the abstract is focused, it's tight, and it's narrow. It's the middle part, that dumbbell. And then there's a broadening towards the end of the article. So whereas false stories inspired fear, disgust, and surprise in replies, true stories inspired anticipation, sadness, joy, and trust. So we're talking about Twitter stories, false and true news on Twitter. Contrary to conventional wisdom, robots accelerated the spread of true and false news at the same rate, implying, and here's the implications of the research, false news spread more than truth because humans, not robots, are more likely to spread it. Okay, so beginning in a fairly broad manner, specifying methods and methodologies and implications, and then broadening out fairly well at the end. Let us look at, oh, this one is interesting. Open space architecture. It's something I've even wondered about myself. In office environments where there are more cubicle arrangements, they call that the open workplace, how that actually impacts the productivity of workers. An interesting study. So this begins with a nice opening sentence that is fairly long, right? I would recommend editing this down to a simplified opening sentence. Organizations' pursuit of increased workplace collaboration has led managers to transform traditional office spaces into quote unquote open, transparency enhancing architecture. I would leave the opening sentence there. That's a nice opening sentence, even as someone who doesn't specialize in this sort of study of design and human technology interaction. I would be interested in this. And then finally, if you look at the end of the article, the results inform our understanding of the impact on human behavior of workspaces that tend towards fewer spatial boundaries. Workspaces are being transformed towards fewer spatial boundaries, leaving the article open for subsequent research, right, by other researchers. Okay, so that is a successful, this is a good example of a general opening line, opening sentence. Beer is the most important popular beverage in the world. So a good, broad opening sentence. And then the final sentence, climate-related weather extremes may threaten the availability and economic accessibility of beer. Right, so the implications are detailed at the end of the abstract. And then in the middle, we learn about the approach to the study, looking at climate impacts on barley production. Okay, so think about that, how you can begin broadly in your abstract, capturing the reader's attention, and then you lay out the details of your study, the nuts and bolts, all the specifics, and then you broaden out again at the end of your abstract, detailing perhaps the implications of your research and avenues for subsequent research. Selecting keywords. So you have your abstract in hand. Oftentimes, the very, very, very last part that is required in an article is keywords. So usually you need at least 5 to 6 keywords for a journal article. These terms allow your article to be located by other researchers conducting database searches. Limit your keywords to particular theories or methodologies that you've developed in your project, the population that you're studying, the geographical scope of your research. In literature, the study of literature, it may be a particular novelist or writer that you will mention in your keywords, a literary theory, and so forth. All right, so keywords. Usually it's best to save writing your keywords for last. Keywords is sort of I find to be a relaxing process after writing the abstract. After you write the abstract, you should have a good idea of the keywords that you will indicate. Okay, so add the abstract of your article to the chat. And while you're doing that, I will just conclude, run through the final sections of the presentation. And then with some time at the end of the presentation, we'll have a look at your abstracts and provide some quick feedback. And I once again, invite other participants to share their feedback on your abstracts, on your journal article structures, on your titles, and so forth. All right, so just add that to the chat while I continue. So you have your article in hand, you've drafted it, you've done all you can to ensure that it is clear, it is comprehensive and complete, and that all of the components are included. How do you submit the article? Most submission, well, part of the submission, of course, is selecting the journal. How do you select a reputable journal? One way to do that is to identify the most well-regarded or leading journals in your field. If you're a PhD student, you may ask your supervisor, what are the leading journals in the field? What journals are you reading as a researcher? Those may be the leading ones in your field. Of course, there are demands now to publish with Scopus, with Web of Science. In Indonesia, in other countries, there are other indexing systems. SSCI, I believe, is used in other countries. So, of course, searching for a journal with these indices, etc., is important. Avoid predatory journal publishers that solicit your work via email and charge you high prices. Oftentimes, they will try to flatter you, say, we came across your research and it's amazing. We love the opportunity to publish your work. Take it with a grain of salt. They are sending these emails out in mass quantities. These are predatory journals to be avoided. If you have a funded project, budget is for assistance with editing, proofing, formatting, and other aspects of manuscript preparation. So if you are an academic and you're putting together a grant application through the Indonesian government or through your university, budget for assistance with editing, with proofing and formatting. That's one way to enhance the quality of the journal article that you'll submit. And I think that you're probably familiar with this. The electronic submission systems are fairly standard. A common system is called OJS, Open Journal Systems, OJS. Basically, you sign up for an account and make sure you also indicate you'd like to be an author. Sometimes you can sign up as a reviewer. And so certainly make sure you sign up as an author. And yeah, they're fairly standard. Most submission now of articles is through some portal such as this. In a rare occasion, they're still sending articles, say, through email address. Okay, what journal will you choose? Write your journal name in the chat, and we'll come back to that after the presentation and give some feedback on your journal choice. It's important to aim for journals that are Scopus ranked, but the reality is that there may be very strong journals in our fields that don't have Scopus ranking for whatever reason. Still, it's good to publish where you can. Scopus and other Web of Science systems are important, but don't let that limit you, I would say. Try to publish broadly, and including Scopus, but including journals that you feel are leading in your field, even if they're not ranked. Now, I want to make sure to touch on this. We are kind of heading towards the end of the presentation, but revising an article is essential. Peer review is an essential part of publication. The whole process can take between 3 to 6 months. From the time you submit an article to the time you receive your peer review reports can take between 3 to 6 months. You should familiarize yourself with the journal's aims and scope and referencing style. That will enhance the peer review process, and try to respond efficiently and quickly to the reports, the reviewers' reports. Now, I won't bring it up on my screen, but in the document I sent to everyone, there's an example of a peer review template from a journal called Transformations. And there's an example from my own publishing of a document I send to editors to show how I've clearly responded to peer review. I create a table, I list all the points raised by the reviewers, and then I clearly show on the right side of the table how I've responded. And sometimes I put the page number of the revised manuscript, and I point out where I've responded. So what that does is really help the editor to determine that you've responded to the feedback and to facilitate the acceptance of your article and ultimately the publication. So have a look at those two examples, the peer review template and the peer review response template, if you call it that, right? They're at the end of that PDF. Don't be discouraged by rejection. Resubmit your work elsewhere after you revise. Finally, promoting an article. Once we have our article in hand, it's been published. ResearchGate and academia are good places to promote your research. Use Twitter, also now known as X, if you wish, or Facebook and LinkedIn to notify your networks of your publication. Make sure your article appears in your ORCID profile. If you don't have an ORCID profile, please do sign up there. Add the publication link to your email signature so that you can advertise it through your email correspondences, and your people you're emailing can easily click on that. Make sure your university library subscribes to the journal in which your article was published. If it's a subscription-based journal, for example, through Elsevier or one of the major academic publishers, make sure your library subscribes to that journal. It's a strong incentive when you say to your library, I've published an article, could you subscribe to the journal that my article appears in? And self-citations are good in moderation. Self-citation is when I cite my own previous research. Good in moderation, not too much. A few is okay, a few. And congratulate yourself and your colleagues. Publishing is a rigorous process. It is intensive in terms of its mental, intellectual, physical, and emotional demands. So certainly congratulate yourself and your colleagues. Mark your achievements, and be proud of yourself. Thank you so much for the opportunity to chat with you today. I think if we have a bit of time, I will just look in the chat here and see if we have any abstracts or article structures that we can comment on. Oh, good. We have a few here. So let's go to the top. And great. So we have sources of Quranic exegesis, how exegetes do analysis on Talut in Q2 247. Great. So the abstract is story about Talut narrated in Surah al-Baqarah, sorry for the pronunciation, 246 to 252. Talut's story is scarce in the Quran, but Ibn Kathir, Atan Tabur, sorry for my pronunciation again, could explain Talut in their contemporary works. His origin, tribe, job, period of power, and demise. Yep, the result of Hadith and Bibla gave a conclusion that the Quran narrative. Good. Okay, that's a good beginning to an abstract. I would say you would need to formulate it for an abstract for a journal. So you'd have to maybe begin with a broad statement about the exegetical research that you're doing, and then work into the specific problem, but you have all the elements there. So think of that beginning with the broad statement, moving into a description of your approach, your methods or your methodology, then broadening out again at the end of your abstract with the implications. But you have all the elements there. It may require some honing and maybe some editing down, but good. That looks like a good first go. Good. So we have, let's have one more here. The research examines the relationship between organizational structure and competitive advantage in regional government agencies in the cooperative sector on the island of Java. Good to specify that it's Java, it's a cooperative sector, and relationship between organizational structure and competitive advantage. That's good. I think that's a second sentence of your abstract. I think your first sentence could be even broader, even more generalized, and that would work. Your first sentence here would work well as a second sentence. So introduce the topic very broadly in your first sentence. But that's the resource-based view approach. So you're talking about here your method and methodology, BRIO analysis. Good, you're getting into that. And then the research findings. Great. And then on average, the organizational structure possesses added value, rarity, and difficulty to imitate. Good. And so go one step farther in the final sentence. What are the implications of the research? What kind of subsequent research could be done? What is the broad social, economic value of the research? But that's an excellent, very good, excellent first start. So one more, the article aims to analyze typologies of Sharia cryptocurrency in Indonesia. Interesting. And how they impede or enhance Sharia financial regulatory technology. Very good. The statement of a problem, a research problem, may be important. So you may begin your article here with a broad statement about Sharia cryptocurrency. And then the next sentence might deal with a problem in the study of Sharia cryptocurrency, which I can't articulate because I don't know your research. And then move into the aim of your article to analyze typology of Sharia cryptocurrency in Indonesia. That's just quickly how I would recommend restructuring. Good. So I see at the end of your abstract, the development of digital transactions with cryptocurrency is certainly unavoidable by the community, but also gets different responses, not only in Indonesia, but also other ASEAN countries. Good. So you're broadening it out beyond Indonesia in that final sentence, and that's what you want to do. That has to do with the broader implications of your research. Okay. I'll pause there. I've exceeded my time. However, if there's any time for questions, I'd be very keen to hear from you. Okay, so we'll pause there. We might have more time to review that in a moment, but I'll pass the session over to Ibu Anissa for now to take us through the next part.
Thank you very much, Dr. John Charles, for enlightening presentation. Now, we have a little time for the participant who wants to ask any question to Dr. John regarding the presentation, regarding your experience in writing, or want to share anything with Dr. John and today's participants. Please, we can anyone. Oh, okay. I see Muhammad Sultan is raising his hand. Baik, Bapak Sultan, mau menanyakan dalam bahasa Indonesia atau bahasa Inggris?
I will try in English.
Okay.
Hello, Dr. John.
Hello, Pak Muhammad.
Yeah, you can call me Sultan. So I had a plan in arranging some research plan. So I want to have your tips on your experience, especially in PhD, on writing your research plan. Do you stand on your conservative view or more progressive views, rather than agreeing all of the supervisors wants? How to impress them, especially from your writings? Can you tell us your story too?
So how to work with your supervisor in terms of, let's say you're receiving suggestions from your supervisor, but you have a different view that may be based more in a progressive view of your field, maybe even some research that your supervisor is not aware of. So how to negotiate that? Is that the
yes,
the
that's
right summary of the
the
question?
point. And can you share your story from your PhD experience too?
Well, it's an interesting question, and I've seen this come up in supervisory relationships. In my own case, I had a good supervisor who was progressively minded and up to date with the current advances in the field. So he gave me lots of tips, and I benefited from that. However, I have seen cases where a supervisor is quite, let's say, conservative or even old-fashioned thinking, and maybe isn't even that up to date in the field. Maybe his or her knowledge of the field is 20 years old. I've seen that happen. And also supervisors who are very fixed on a particular method or methodology, particular conceptual lens. That does happen. So it's a process of negotiation. And I think if you can make a strong case for a more progressive view of your field through citing the literature and incorporating the new literature into your literature reviews and into your publications, then you're making a strong case to your supervisor. Ultimately, it's the student's decision. At least that's how I've looked at it in Australian and US context. Ultimately, it's the research student's decision about the particular orientation of his or her project. So the supervisor is simply like one who makes suggestions. It's not written in stone. It's simply because if your supervisor adopted participatory research 20 years ago and is really fixed on that approach, that's great, but the field has evolved. And it's a process of negotiation, but it's important for the student to remember that ultimately it's your project, it's your intellectual value, and you have the right to make a decision about, let's say, developing a new methodology. That's where innovation happens. So maybe your supervisor is a little old-fashioned. I've seen that. Now, the other case is, I'm not sure how it works in Indonesia, but in Australia, there's often a secondary supervisor, or sometimes called an associate supervisor, and sometimes a tertiary supervisor, so as part of a research committee. In the US, it's called a PhD committee. You might have 3, 4, or even 5 members of your committee. So in that case, it would be helpful if another individual on your committee is more knowledgeable about the particular direction you want to go and can make a strong case for it. But that's a tricky territory, and it's a good practice of negotiating. Ideally, your supervisor will see the approach that you're taking is beneficial, it's current, and it's one that can produce innovation and knowledge in your field. Yeah, it's an interesting question. Thank you.
Thank you,
Terima
Dr. John.
kasih, Bapak Sultan. Apakah sudah cukup menjawab?
Ya, cukup, Mbak.
Okay, thank you, Pak Sultan, for your question. Next one, I have someone raising hand, Pak Jauhara Albar. Silahkan, Bapak mau bertanya dalam bahasa Indonesia atau bahasa Inggris? Maaf, Bapak Jauhara masih mute.
Dalam bahasa Inggris, maaf.
Oke, baik, silahkan.
Okay, good morning, Mr. John. Thank you for the time. I want to ask a question about using a pronoun in a journal or article. My lecturer said don't use pronoun I in your article, but some said it is okay to use pronoun I in article. So which one do you prefer to give a pronoun to yourself or myself? Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. It's a good question. And there's no clear answer about it, unfortunately. I would say, as a general rule of thumb, don't use a pronoun such as I researched such and such problem, or we, if you're co-authoring the article. However, as we even saw I think the article was from a major scientific journal, I'm forgetting, we saw in the slides, the team used the pronoun we, right? I would say also that it's more accepted to use I and we in humanities articles, study of literature, and perhaps in the social sciences and in educational studies as well. But certainly in the humanities, the use of I is more common. Now, the other consideration is using I in an abstract versus using I somewhere in the article. I would say generally don't use first-person pronouns in your abstract, but in the humanities, you can certainly use first-person pronouns. But I actually prefer the more objective approach. Say using third person, not because of wanting to remove the identity of the researcher necessarily, but it sometimes makes it easier to comprehend. So I would say follow your supervisor's advice. It's a relatively small point, but it can affect the sentence structure. Active sentences are often, begun with a first person. So I perform the research, we perform the research. And when you have to revert to the third person, sometimes there's a tendency to select the passive voice. So it's fine to stick with the third person. Just be careful of your sentence structures. Make sure there's still a way to use predominantly the active voice in your writing, and be aware of your discipline. If you're in the humanities, and if it's accepted in journals that you read, then there's more scope for using the first person. If you're in the sciences, generally first person is not used. So yeah, that would be my rough response to your question. Thank you for that. It's one that comes up even in completing assignments for undergraduates. Sometimes they ask, "Oh, can I use first person or third person?" And yes, this discussion comes up. But thank you for asking. And once again, follow the conventions of your journal that you're aiming to publish in. If you see that I is accepted or we is accepted, then there's more freedom to do it.
Thank you, Dr. John. Bapak Jauhara Albar, apakah sudah menjawab jawaban dari Pak John? Baik. Okay. I see nobody's raising hand, but I have two questions here on the chat box. John, let's take a look here. Let me read it for you. The first one from Aida Sartimbul. Make sure that your university library subscribes to the journal in which your article was published. What does it mean?
Okay, yes. So you might publish your article in an open access journal, which means that typically the journal is available freely online. And so someone just needs to go to the website of the journal and download your article. It's free, it's open access. That's the movement in academia now. The old model of publishing, which still exists, which is called sometimes called the paywall model, which means, or the subscription-based model. And what that is, let's say I publish an article in a journal, but for others to read the article, they have to pay, or they have to go to their library that pays for the journal. Right? That's the opposite of open access. That's called a subscription model. So your library pays a subscription to access that particular journal. If you publish your article in a subscription-based journal, encourage your library or make sure that your library subscribes to that journal. Let's say it's the Journal of Natural Studies. It's a subscription journal, which means that for someone else to read my article, that person has to pay, or they have to go to a library that pays, that has a subscription to that journal. If you publish in that journal and your library, your university library does not subscribe, write to your librarian and say, I published an article in Journal of Natural Studies. I see the library doesn't subscribe to that journal. Could the library subscribe to that journal? It's a good way to make sure that at least your colleagues at your university can access that journal freely through the library, and therefore they can access your article. Does that make sense? So it's the distinction nowadays with how journals are structured. Open access, anyone can access the journal article, and subscription. The subscription model means there's still a fee involved. Now, who pays that fee? That's the question. Do I pay the fee as someone wanting to read your article, or do I log into my library and my library pays the fee and I can read your article through my library that's the question. But there's two modes of publishing now: open access and subscription-based publishing with journals. Is that distinction clear?
Thank you, John. Baik, Ibu Aida, apakah kira-kira jawaban dari Pak John barusan sudah cukup jelas? Apakah Ibu Aida masih ada di Zoom?
For your answer, but the problem is our university library doesn't have access or doesn't pay for the that publication itself. So I think it is not open access. So that's a problem maybe.
That's difficult. Yes, some in that case, what I tend to do is distribute the PDF. If I publish an article in a subscription-based journal, and I want my colleagues to have it, I'll just send the final published PDF to them, and not to distribute, but just for their reference. But yeah, that's difficult if you're publishing a subscription-based journal and your library doesn't subscribe to the journal. Yeah.
Yeah. So for the problem, in this case, I just promote from the research kit, and then maybe some interested person can contact directly to me.
Yeah, that's a good way to do it.
Thank you.
The other approach is you can send what's called a preprint of your article. With most journals, they don't want you to send the final PDF, published version of your article, freely to everyone, but usually you can send what's called a preprint. A preprint is the version of your article that you send just before your article is formatted by the publisher. So let's say you've revised your article and you have a new version, and you're sending this to the journal for final formatting and publication. That version that you just sent is called a preprint. And typically you're free to upload your preprint to websites like ResearchGate, Academia, and elsewhere without any copyright problems.
Yeah, that's right. From Elsevier, they have one month or something for free access, but after that they will close the access.
Oh yeah, that's difficult. Yeah, it's changing. The trend is changing towards open access, but it's going to take some time for that to change, say with the traditional journals that are publishing by fees. Yeah, great. Any other questions about?
Terima kasih, Ibu Ida. Okay, John, thank you for your answer, and it's been a very nice discussion. We have one left, I see in the comments. I have a question to Dr. Ryan. Is it possible to use researchers.live website for our full article before submitting?
I regret to say I don't know what that is, research.live. Could you explain it first, what it is?
Baik, Bapak Joli atau Ibu Joli bisa menjelaskan ini website tentang apa? Apakah Ibu Joli masih ada di Zoom untuk menjelaskan kepada Pak John website researcher.live ini website apa ya?
Certainly have a look while we're waiting as well. Researcher.live.
Okay.
It may be something new that I'm not familiar with. It's good.
Okay. I think Jolie is not with us, but we can go back to her later on when she's back to Zoom. Okay, let's move on to another question. John, we have 5 minutes left, so it might be our last question. So from Umu Arliana, is it true that when a university subscribes to a journal publisher, it will increase the acceptance rates?
When a university subscribes to a journal publisher, I like to think that that's not true because of the peer review process. So let's say my university subscribes to the journal. I submit an article to that journal. The editor will know my identity and will know my university, but the peer reviewers won't know my identity. They won't know the university. So I think that there's an ethical problem, say, with that the peer review process would hopefully overcome. If it's a strong article, then the peer review would reflect that with a positive outcome. If it's not a strong article, then the peer review reflect that hopefully as well. So I'd like to say that no, it's not the case that the university subscribing to the journal will enhance the lecturers or researchers' success with publishing in that journal. And that's why the peer review process is meant to be what they call double blind, so that the reviewers don't know your identity and you don't know the reviewer's identity. Yeah, so I would say hopefully no.
Okay, thank you, John. Another question, maybe the last one. I'm sorry, we have 3 minutes. Is it okay for one more question, John?
Oh, absolutely, sure.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So maybe the question from Sri Wahyuni, maybe the question is it possible to use web link in our article?
Oh, web links. So URLs, let me just have it. Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So there are definitely a few cases where you can use web links. Let's say I've published a lot about art and photography. And to include an image in an article, sometimes there are copyright requirements. Maybe I want to include an image of a work of art, and the copyright holder wants to charge me some money so that I can include that image in my article. So that becomes quite burdensome and expensive. So what you can do instead is point the reader to a URL where the image is already available online somewhere for the reader to have a look at the image. So yes, that's a case where you can use URLs also to projects. Let's say you're researching a particular organization and they have a presence online. You can connect the reader to the organization through the URL. So there's lots of cases where you could use a URL. You should make a distinction between using a URL as a reference and using a URL in other ways. So let's say you're taking some material from a website to some information and you want to reference that website. The URL in that case should be included in your bibliography, in your works cited, in your list of references, rather than embedded in the text somewhere. So generally, as a rule of thumb, try to avoid putting URLs in the text. Maybe you put a URL as a footnote or an endnote for the reader to click, and in my case, to see the artwork. Or if it's the case you're using the URL, the website as a source, you would embed the URL into the bibliography. That's how I would think of using URLs. But absolutely, yes, you can use URL to help the reader.
Thank you very much, John. Ibu Sri Wahyuni, semoga menjawab ya, Bu ya. Okay, John, it seems like we are closing to the end session. But before we close, let me read the recap of today's session discussion. In summary, the research journey begins with an exploration of the research story and sources of inspiration. It is crucial to select a specific and impactful topic that contributes meaningfully to knowledge and society, along with crafting and engaging an informative title. Structuring the article involves creating a flexible blueprint encompassing components such as literature review, methodology, and essential sections. The drafting process requires persistent writing and rewriting, adhering to effective writing habits and managing references through tools like MENULIS or EndNote. Peer review is an integral part of the academic publication process, which typically takes 3 to 6 months. Responding effectively to reviewers and summarizing revisions are key aspects. In the face of rejection, it is essential to resubmit the work to another journal after making necessary revisions. Promoting research can be accomplished through platforms like ResearchGate and social media. Lastly, the use of clear, concise language, avoidance of excessive jargon, and rigorous proofreading before submission are recommended practices. Throughout these journeys, the elements of belief, inspiration, commitment, discipline, and goal setting remain essential for success in research and publishing endeavors. As we near the conclusion of this momentous session, we extend our heartfelt gratitude to Dr. John Charles Ryan for his invaluable contribution in this keynote session. Before we say goodbye, I want to invite everyone to open your camera. Everyone who is still in the Zoom session, I invite you to open your camera to have a group picture. Since we have a lot of participants, please bear with me because I have to take several pictures. Oke, Bapak Ibu yang masih ada di Zoom, saya undang untuk open cam karena saya ingin mengambil foto bersama sebagai kenang-kenangan dari webinar hari ini. Mohon Bapak Ibu yang masih bergabung di Zoom untuk menghidupkan kameranya. Baik, saya mulai. Ini ada 7 slide, jadi saya harus mengambil 7 foto ya. Baik, kita mulai dari foto slide yang pertama. 1, 2, 3, senyum. Oke, slide yang kedua. 1, 2, 3, senyum. Oke, slide ketiga. 1, 2, 3, senyum. 1, 2, 3, slide yang keempat. Oke, Bapak Ibu senyum. Baik, slide kelima. 1, 2, 3, senyum. Baik, slide ke-6. 1, 2, 3, senyum. Slide terakhir yang ke-7. 3, 2, 1, smile. Baik, terima kasih Bapak Ibu sekalian. Thank you very much for all the participants for your kind attention and contribution. Lastly, I would like to remind you to fill the Google form for your absence because it will be written, your name will be written in the e-certificate that will be sent to your email soon by BLC team. Thank you very much for your attendance. Please do not leave the Zoom before you fill the Google form because the link will not be provided elsewhere. Thank you very much once again, Dr. John Ryan. May we see each other again in the next webinar. That's all from me.
My pleasure to join you all today, and good luck with your writing and your research. Thank you to the organizers for a great session, and I hope to see you all again soon.
Thank you, Dr. John Ryan. We will definitely see you soon in another webinar. Baik, terima kasih kepada semua peserta. Saya moderator, mohon undur diri. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Mr. John.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, John. See you later.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. See you again. Bye-bye.
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 Bye-bye. Selamat siang.
Ya.